I would, excuse me. I would really love to know why all my settings have changed since yesterday. I've changed nothing. Test, 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 test. That is ridiculous. No idea why. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Always blame the computer gremlins. They're always at fault. Anyways, good morning, Jamie. Good morning, James. Hope you two are doing well. Okay. I don't think today is going to be a particularly intensive or long stream. It is Sunday, after all. I'm thinking of rearranging things so that Saturdays are my day off. It's what it used to be. Working 7 days a week is definitely not great for the voice. On the server side, most servers are either running Unix, Linux, or Windows Server. So, I mean, it's still a thing. Good morning, Doverkin. Hope you're doing well today. Man drinks coffee on stream. Yippee! Yes, film at 11. An epic biopic about man drinking coffee. Okay. I think we'll move on to the first one. Take it nice and easy, nice and slow. Relaxed, calm. Well, as calm as the story allows. Well, we're going to be doing part 4 and 5 of Because Someone Had To. Then we're going to do 4 short stories. So, that's what we're looking at today. Total of, what is that? 1 hour, 45 minutes of finished narration. Plus minus. Excuse me. Okay, let's get this show on the road. Greetings, ladies and metal-gents, and welcome to the latest narration. Greetings, ladies and metal-gents, and welcome to the latest edition of Retribution, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is part of a 7-part series called Because Someone Had To. If you want, there is a playlist listed down below if you are interested. There is a playlist listed down below. If you are interested, there is a playlist listed down below. Gonna be a rough day. But anyways, on to the main story. The Admiral was pale as updates from the main battle kept coming forward. It had been so one-sided at first. Dozens of Council and Senate ships crippled or destroyed. Her fleet's guns were bigger, shields stronger, armor thicker. Her crews and captains were better. They held the edge on every front but one. Humanity did not want a war of guns and bombs, of violence and destruction. They sought to cripple or disable enemy ships, drive them off, or force them to surrender. They weren't afraid to kill, but humanity had always been too good at it. They didn't want it, but they would if they have to. But the Senate species fought for their people in a way humanity did not. They fought for their children, for their future generations, for themselves, striving to eke out a better future in a system that... Striving. Well, happy birthday, Jamie. Hope you have a fantastic day. With much cake. Striving to eke out a better future in a system that benefited only a select few. They fought knowing that to fail could mean disaster for their people, that to retreat would mean loss of political power, the defaulting of financial debts. To surrender was seen as a weakness, a lack of worth to the council species, a death sentence for their people. So they fought with everything they had as their ships died and were torn apart by human guns, as their systems failed and betrayed them, co-opted by human AIs. They fought and died, fueled by fear of what could come to their families, their species. And fueled by that fear, that devotion to everything they held dear and the hope for a better future that could not include them, they sacrificed themselves. Each ship that threw itself into the path of human vessel, each that came about to shield a Siluan's warship with their own lives. Every time it happened, the Admiral watched crews that willingly killed themselves to protect their loved ones. Good people, aliens though they may be, with simply universal motivations. Motivations, reasoning, desires that weren't so different from a human. They just needed to know there was a better option, a better way. Of course, there was also the far more personal pain that each time one of those Senate race of member species ships sacrificed itself, more of her own people died. Fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, each ship lost meant so many families destroyed. Admiral to the fleet, Hermes and support ships are beginning to launch rescue teams. First, second destroyer groups are to move to engage hostile reserve formation. Kunvum is to draw the Warilia battle group away from the main engagement zone and into first and second's route into first and second's route of advance. Keep the Zeliant Hive back. She studied the tactical display as her staff assembled them, drawing light onto each phase and area of the battle throughout the system, painting a single unified picture for her to interpret. The Zeliant Hive ship was one of the largest spacefaring crafts that she had ever seen. It was slow, impossible to maneuver, and had little by means of major anti-capital weapons, but it was heavily armored and could take a hell of a beating. She had no interest in dealing with it in combat. Better to force them to surrender or flee. Taking it down in combat would tie up too many resources from the rest of the fleet, which was already laboring to deal with combat losses and the increasingly suicidal enemy. Through Loki, she was already aware that the Grand Admiral was encouraging the ramming tactic, gladly throwing away the lives of ships of his own allies to protect the Siluan's fleet, his own ship, and the mission as a whole. They believed their fleet to be the only one humanity could possibly have fielded, that the 50 ships under her command was everything humanity could throw at them, that if they were broken here, the war would be all but over. And he wasn't entirely wrong. She commanded the bulk of the fleet, but more ships were being built, launched, crewed, just as the Council and Senate would be pushing more warships, Just as the Council and Senate would be pushing more warship projects forward, seeking to fuel yet more craft. It would begin a long war indeed. The Convum combat AI relied on the dedicated drone warships that shared his intelligence across their systems. The more hounds in his control, the more powerful his program, his mind, became. He had never before held so many hounds at one time, and the result of that level of processing power revealed itself as advanced electronic warfare capabilities and reaction speed to the enemy action. He had rode a dozen hounds through the Sheldunta fleet. The drones were unshielded, lightly armored, relying entirely on maneuverability and speed to avoid the enemy. He had lost one in his passage through the Sheldunta fleet, and mourned it silently as he followed Athena's directions to continue after new targets. Each hound, although smaller than a destroyer, was far faster than just as one. was far faster and just as well armed. Their sensor silhouette was tiny, easily missed, and they were nearly upon the Warilla fleet before the feline-like aliens spotted him and brought their 11-strong fleet around to meet the Kunvum's 11 hounds head-on. If he could feel exhilaration, he would have. The Shaldantov had done well to strike one of his hounds. They had been taken by surprise, yet had still put up a good fight. But there had never been much challenge to it. Kunvum had known the outcome before the battle had begun. His hounds against the Warillian fleet was a far more interesting engagement. Some part of him found it amusing. The humans called his ships hounds, while they considered the Warillians to be feline-like in appearance. The similarities were superficial at best, but so too were those of his hounds to dogs. He would not have been surprised if it had been all Loki's doing, arranging the fleet arrangements and movements of the punitive fleet contingents to try and urge the Warillia into his path. The Warillia were a predator-evolved species. They were built for the chase, and so as the two fleets neared, they began to alter their course, meaning to lead the Kunvums into charging their flanks and the brunt of the combined fleet. Meaning to lead the Kunvums into charging their flanks and the brunt of their combined fire, before giving chase as the hounds would surely pass through their ranks and continue on. Instead, Kunvum's own fleet charged ahead as if about to do exactly as the Warillians wanted. But just as they came upon the enemy weapons range, the hounds split into two separate formations, charging either end of the Warillian battle line. They were forced to make minor adjustments at the last moment, firing into what they tracked as the hounds' course, only for Kunvum's ships to make a sudden last-moment course correction and charge into the center of the Warillian line instead. Shots flew wide. Weapons and gunnery crews struggled to track the last-second course changes, equally struggling to understand how any living crew could have survived such dramatic changes in course over such short distances. A few shots found their mark, gouging rents into the armor of the lead hounds, and the hounds returned fire at point blank. Warillian ships flared and failed. Hulls were pummeled by high-speed kinetic weapons. Their armor dimpled, then shredded as those high-speed projectiles pierced the hull, only to begin shredding through softer interior systems. They didn't have the same opinion of how heavily reinforced the interior structure of the warship needed to be, and 1-kilogram tungsten steel spheres flashed through the ship's interiors, shredding systems and crew alike. Those that survived were faced with explosive decompression of the interior compartments. Lances of energy were fired. Lances of energy weapons fire melted and sliced through the already shielded. Lances of energy and weapons fire melted and sliced through the already shieldless vessels. In their first pass, the hounds took 3 Warillia craft. The Warillia struggled to bring their ships about to give chase, weapons again pivoting in their turrets to regain firing solutions on the human AI ships. They were met by a sight of those very same vessels breaking and coming about in perfect symmetry, ready for another, albeit slower, run at the Warillia battle line. Elements of the punitive fleet broke through the main line of the battle and made full speed towards the Hermes and her escorts. Many were already damaged, but seeing openings in the human formations, they had surged forward, intent on trying to take out the human support vessels and earn themselves a credit in the eyes of the Council races. That opportunity quickly taken from them, though. That opportunity was quickly taken from them, though, as first and second destroyer groups made their own advance in the obvious maneuver to reach the Siluan's flagship on its own escorts. To reach the Siluan's flagship and its own escorts. Knowing a counselor was aboard that flagship, those vessels that had been bound to the Hermes broke off their own advance, heading instead after the destroyer groups. Through it all, the Admiral and Athena worked tirelessly to coordinate the fleet and its myriad parts. Her staff was constantly compiling and updating data on the Hermes' many deployed squadrons, ammunition stores, damage reports, fuel, debris trajectories. Athena's attention was split between the information Loki constantly provided of plotted hostile movements and targeting systems, pushing forward tactical suggestions and observations to the Admiral's staff, and plotting their own side of the battle with her foe. And plotting their own side of the battle with her fellow AIs. The myriad individual fleets that had been up there. The myriad of staff. And plotting their own side of the battle with her fellow AIs. The myriad individual fleets that had made up the punitive force. The myriad individual fleets that had made up the punitive fleet simply could not keep up with the humans' ability to adapt and adjust their formations and tactics. As that revelation dawned on them that the battle was lost before it had ever begun, the desperation began to reveal itself in the form of suicidal charges and deadly collisions. The member races knew the battle was lost, and knew what would happen if they did not make a good showing of themselves. And the only way to do that was to die fighting. The Siluans, of course, had another option. Damaged Siluan ships fled from battle, scrambling back towards the command ship to take up defensive stations around the Counselor, not the Grand Admiral. They too knew that was the stake they should fail. They too knew what was at stake should they fail, and letting the Counselor die was a death sentence for their own genetic lines. However, they also knew that the Counselor would flee long before he was in direct risk, and that they could flee with him, protecting him from the enemy. The battle raged for hours. First and second destroyer groups joined the fray, leading their tails back into the heart of the battle, where the Georgios Averoff's guns began to make short work of them. 3 Sheldonta ships entered the fray, making straight for the powerful battleship. The lead vessel was struck and shattered by a barrage of torpedoes. The remaining 2 made good showing of themselves. Their shields sparked and spots failures as their paths. Their shields failed. Their shields sparked and spot failure. Their shields sparked and spot faded as they passed through debris fields or through firing arcs, but they surged onwards. Small and agile despite their piecemeal construction, the Sheldonta vessels danced through the battle, closing on the Georgios Averoff through a field of debris and the shattered wreckage of a Siluan's vessel. They flashed into the opening, a final suicidal dash akin to cavalry against a ready line of pikemen. The second ship vanished into a field of expanding debris as 2 of the Georgios Averoff's main turrets brought it into their sights. The third leapt through, shield shattered, and hull failure. The third leapt through, shield shattered, and hull fatally charred. It crashed into the Georgios Averoff's shields, engines detonating on impact. A bright flash of light, and a hole was torn in the battleship's defensive shields. Debris from the second craft tumbled through, crashing against the battleship's hull. Flashes of heat from the kinetic impact. The massive ship wasn't even visibly rocked by the impacts. Its shields slowly reformed over the hole the Sheldonta had punched into them. The main guns calmly resumed tracking new targets. Convoom's helms dueled with the Warilla, both fleets dancing around each other in an ever-tightening dance. Each AI vessel destroyed lessened his ability to see and predict their movements. Each Warilla ship lost meant a new hole in their formation, a new weakness for the AI to exploit. 3 hounds remained when the last of the 2 Warilla ships fled, a first for their people. Damaged, barely able to limp away, They fell in around the massive salient hive ship, not yet aware that it had already accepted Loki's option to surrender. It had just entered weapons range, and the brunt of the punitive fleet was destroyed. Aboard the flagship, with less than half the Siluan's fleet holding station around it, and most damaged, the Councillor stood over the dying body of the Grand Admiral, his claws dripping blood and screaming in rage at the crew that had so failed the Siluan's race, failed the Council, failed him. Ignored by most, the communications technician had also been killed. The thought that a low-caste worker had been the only one of the crew that had understood what was gone wrong, working independently to fix the problem, was too insulting to let pass uncorrected. The Siluan's fleet, and the Admiral let them. The Siluan's fleet fled, and the Admiral let them. Her fleet had numbered 50 crewed ships when the battle had begun. Confirm had lost 9 of his hounds. Each ship had taken years to build, and would be hard to replace. But as the battle had grown desperate, the suicide runs to the lesser races of the Senate had taken a heavy toll. Dozens of ships had been lost, and most of those that remained were badly damaged. She had lost thousands of skilled crew, and irreplaceable resource. Ships could be rebuilt, but experienced crew, friends, and family, they could never be replaced. The willingness of those aliens to throw themselves in human guns, to kill themselves in desperate acts to cripple or destroy the human warship, it had shown her a glimpse of the war to come, a long, brutal, and bloody war. Coming alongside now, sir. We've detected Atmo in 3 areas. It's cold in there, but thermals are detecting heat signatures. A few dozen survivors, maybe. The shuttle's flight engineer stood in the hatchway between the crew area and the main compartment of the rescue shuttle. A dozen men... A dozen men and women were seating their helmets and slinging gear, and the team leader offered a confirmatory thumbs up. Before finishing seating his helmet and activating his intercom. Roger that. 3 teams, thumbs, kettle. He indicated 2 members of the rescue team, senior and experienced hands, and they responded in return. And they responded in turn. Nicknames, of course. Thumbs, because he only had one real one, and... Thumbs, because... Hands. Nickname. Nicknames, of course. Thumbs, because he only had one real one. A poster boy in his early days of the don't put your fingers where you wouldn't put your lesson. Kettle, because she was a large Congolese woman named Potter, and she liked tea, which had only come out after she'd received the name. The rescue team formed up, and the flight engineer sealed off the chamber before it depressurized. Moments later, the 12 were leaving the relative safety of the shuttle's hold, entering the hazardous realm of the tumbling debris field around the wreckage shuttle. Entering the hazardous realm of the tumbling debris field around the wrecked Saltanta fleet. They made their way into the ship easily enough. It had been torn apart by weapons fire. The ship's haphazardly formed hull was pockmarked with dozen direct hits, and it was a sort of miracle that it was some sort of miracle that there could be anyone left alive on board. 3 other shuttles, 3 other shuttles, little more than tugs, had carefully latched on to the debris and managed to slow its Three other shuttles, little more than tugs, had carefully latched onto the debris and managed to slow its uncontrolled tumble through space. They were still working to slow it to a stop, and once done, would immediately be off towards the next wreck and the next waiting rescue teams. Apparently, the Shaldanta had learned long ago how dangerously fragile or prone to structural failure their scavenging ships could be, and many of the main rooms doubled as lifeboats. The team split up as they entered the ship, Kettle leading hers away along the ship's hull towards another tear as the Kettle leading hers away along the ship's hull towards another tear that was closer to their destination. Thumbs took his team down a separate corridor, its length sickeningly twisting as the ship's hull had corkscrewed and twisted during the battle, and exposed to the void of space in some areas. And Stone led his own team towards the nearest of the 3 lifeboats. He earned his nickname because he was known to be a deadpan and steady, letting everything life threw at him wash over him like a stone in a river. Of course, stones in water tended to get worn away over time, no matter how sturdy they seemed. As they moved along, he carefully moved the shredded, charred bodies of the Shaldantan out of their path. The things were barely half his height, and the only reason the hulls were large enough for him and his team to move through was because the ship was salvaged, not custom-built. He spent a moment to study its face before gently pushing it away, and into the void through another large hole in the bulkhead, pressing on. They reached a single door. They reached a sealed door, a single flashing green light above it. The team worked quickly, without any guidance from Stone. 2 worked in lining the surviving bulkheads on either side of the doorway with cable, then attached a tarp-like membrane that quickly sealed off any airtight. Then attached a tarp-like membrane that quickly sealed off an airtight space outside the door of the lifeboat. The cables were then attached to a power source and charged, and the membrane suddenly hardened as strong as steel. The 3rd crew member then activated the pack she had been carrying through the wrecked ship and filled the newly formed chamber with atmosphere hospitable to Shaldanta in the room beyond. The green light above the door suddenly flashed to orange, the sensor detecting atmosphere and unlocking automatically. The 4 humans magnetized their boots and knee pads. They each dropped to their knees, hands held up and out from their bodies, and after a glance between Stone and the 1 team members who was visibly nervous about what was about to happen, they opened the door. Inside, a dozen Shaldanta survivors went from hopeful to terrified as they realized their rescuers weren't fellow clanmates. Many were visibly wounded, but 2 still surged forward, wielding makeshift weapons, tools or pipes. Stone wasn't sure, but clubs, certainly. He raised his hands slightly higher, then bobbed his head twice towards the 2, before speaking through his suit's loudspeaker and translation software. "We come for clan and comrades." The 2 club-wielding adults stopped. Fresh atmosphere was pumping into the room, breathable to the Shaldanta within. Most wore environmental suits. Good morning, Joseph. I hope you're doing well. The 2 club-wielding adults stopped. Fresh atmosphere was pumping into the room, breathable to the Shaldanta within. Most wore environment suits, but they hadn't yet donned their helmets, relying on the lifeboat room's air supply first before turning to their personal tanks. The air in the room had been getting thin, and those that had no suits to fall back on were clearly relieved by the rush of fresh air. The group of Shaldanta shared glances. Stone watched, his HUD littered with updates and body language markers. They were nervous, understandably so, angry, afraid. "I offer honesty and truth. Your clan still fights. 3 ships raced to punitive fleet's aid. They do this knowing the effort will fail, the battle lost. They do this knowing we will not spare them, and they will die. And that they will die." The group all turned to gaze at Stone as he spoke. The subtleties of the translations were immense. too much for Stone alone to be able to fully impress upon the gathered Shaldunter. Loki had prepared the speech, and it was almost comical how his HUD showed him images of himself in various poses or stances, meant to mimic Shalduntan body language to help impart the exact meaning of the words. Language was a very complicated thing, after all. They pressed the attack, so the rest may live. Stone had been briefed on what exactly he was trying to impart into. Stone had been briefed on what exactly he was trying to impart to the Shaldunta survivors, and he could only hope Loki had gotten it right, or that he hadn't screwed up the gestures and inflections. There was a pause in the crowd, and then they all lowered themselves to their knees, much as human rescuers had when the door had first opened, a gesture not entirely of surrender, but acceptance of the situation as well. Stone was getting a new appreciation for the eggheads that studied xenolinguistics and xenopsychology. Stone was getting a new appreciation for the eggheads that studied xenolinguistics and xenopsychology. Stone was gaining a new appreciation for the eggheads that studied xenolinguistics and xenopsychology before the war. Breaking entire civilizations of cultural shackles they had been raised into wouldn't succeed through violence alone. Humanity had the edge in that, as was being demonstrated in a battle elsewhere in the system. But one species could hardly stand against dozens. Not for long. It had never been meant to be a war of guns and bombs. Stone waved for his team to enter the room, and they quickly began working with the survivors to prepare them for extraction from the wrecked ship. Kettle and Thumbs signaled that they had similar success. Survival bags were pulled from pouches, and those Shaldunta without suits were coaxed into them, zipped up tight, and their seals were triple-checked, as with those in the environmental suits. As with those in environment suits. And then the erected barriers were dropped, the atmosphere was vented, and a few dozen exhausted Shaldunta survivors, enemies of humanity due to the politics and social Enemies of humanity, due to the politics and social bindings of the Council and Senate, were led to the waiting shuttle, to be whisked away to the Hermes and her support crafts. They would receive medical treatment, food, rest. Humane treatment, as befitting prisoners of war taken on good terms. It had never been meant to be a war of violence. It was a war of ideas. And humanity's ideas offered one thing few under the Council species' heels could have ever imagined. They offered hope. End of chapter. What's up? No, you can't climb up on my lap. You want to say hello to everybody? You poor baby. Yes. Grunt. Talk to the crowd. Here you go. There's a microphone. Yes, puppy. You can't be a narrator. You're too short. Too short. Alrighty. Hello, all the new people. Welcome. Yes, definitely. Although I think there are other dogs that also have pretty interesting vocalizations, shall we call them. All right, we'll move on to the next one. Greetings, ladies and metal gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Retribution, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. Where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. Yeah. This particular story is called Because Someone Had To, and is a 7-part series, this being the 6th part out of the 7. There is a playlist listed down below in the description. There is a playlist listed down below in the description if you are interested. Anyways, on to the story. The Kiltan child's carapace rattled, had its plates flexed and clacked together nervously. Even the children knew what the humans had lost in the war. Its mandibles clacked, and an uncertain hiss followed, as the child struggled to understand how to word its question. So the teacher continued, taking the class's attention away from the shaken Kiltan child. Children were mean, even alien children. The humans didn't fight just with ships and guns. Their most dangerous weapon to the council was words. Freedom, equality, rights. Ideas are much harder to fight. None of the council could have imagined the war with the Terrans would last so long. Fleets had been shattered in the voids of space. Worlds had been burned under the fire of Senate species guns. The horrors of biological warfare, the devastation of nuclear fire. But always felt on distant, once human worlds, as the Terrans were pushed back, demanding blood for every foot they lost. After 10 years, the protests and riots had begun amongst the Senate worlds, civilians and slaves crying out against the war. Higher taxes, forced conscription, rationing, smuggling became rampant. The very pirates the council's patrol ships had once hunted had been left unchecked as the patrol fleets were drawn into the conflict. And with the rise of the black market and smuggling rings, the Terrans' war opened onto a new front. Council propaganda spoke of grand victories and the ever-nearing end of the war. The arrogant humans were surrendering by the millions, entire planets throwing off the yoke of an oppressive government to submit to their rightful place at the feet of the Council and Senate. The humans smuggled in unfiltered footage of the battles that were raged, of field hospitals where human and Senate-free crews were tended, combat reporters interviewing defectors and rebels that had joined the human cause for freedom in the galaxy. It was propaganda in its own right, but its impact grew with every passing month. Every loved one conscripted to the cause, every missed meal or every loved one conscripted to the cause, every missed meal or confiscated convenience taken to the war effort and never seen again, except occasionally on the pirate smuggled videos from the humans. Someone's lost loved one would be seen in a human camp, healthy and well-fed. Comprehensive lists of the names of the fates of the POWs, a fleeting glimpse of the missed loved ones in one of the human prison camps, receiving medical treatment, allowances for religious and cultural receiving medical treatment, allowances for religious or cultural requests, and as the protests escalated, teams of humans and their growing list of allies and as protests escalated, teams of humans and their growing list of allies were smuggled into council space. They embedded into the local scene and began instructing civilians on how to be heard by their leaders. And when the executions of the most outspoken began, how to fight back. The Council's war effort suddenly found itself torn between the costly battles against the humans and the sapping of available manpower, as once loyal planets needed ever-enlarging garrisons to keep the slaves and civilians in check. The first true rebellions began 20 years into the conflict, with the assassination of a sector administrator and his aides. In what proved later to be a fatal mistake, the Council launched a kinetic bombardment on the capital where the assassination took place. Millions of civilians were killed in a bid to cow the growing unrest. It failed. The captain sat in a large larger chamber of the cave system turned headquarters of the Fiorita Republic. The captain sat in a larger chamber of the cave system turned headquarters of the Fiorita Rebellion. The planet Fiorita Prime was the anchor world of one of the Council's largest dedicated military shipyards. Even in the green-tinted light of day, the massive orbital shipyards could be seen around the planet's rocky moon overhead. There were only 20 humans on the planet, special forces operatives embedded to assist the local rebel movement, in an entirely advisory role. It was up to the people of Fiorita to strive for their own freedoms and equality. The entire human strategy of grassroots and populist movements that belonged to the people it sought to free. The war was into its 24th year. Hundreds of Senate planets were torn apart by rebellion. Senate warships had gone rogue, some falling to piracy, and others to the raising the flag of rebellion. But the Council's war against the humans continued to progress, with the colonies of Alpha Centauri and the shipyards in Bernard Star having fallen to their fleets. Humanity had held the advantage of quality. Their crews were both better trained and dedicated to the cause, their leaders more adaptable and inventive. Human military and technical sciences had far outstripped the Council's and Senate races even before the conflict had begun, and had only continued to advance. But they were only one people, a handful of planets compared to what was held under the Council's talons, which had held the advantage of quantity. He was tasked to advise the Fiorita Rebellion. Small teams were seated around the planet, working diligently to train rebel fighters, offering a wealth of experience to their planning sessions, and helping guide the propaganda campaign on the planet. But at the end of the day, the fight was led by the people of Fiorita, as was the case on 100 planets across Council space. In an adjacent chamber, a captured military shuttle was being prepped. The rebels had worked hard to prepare for what was to come, a daring raid on the lunar shipyards, a strike to cripple their manufacturing capability. A flotilla of pirate raiders waited in the system's inner asteroid belt, ready to unleash an ancient human weapon on the shipyards, once the rebel team had crippled its central computer and defensive capabilities. Fireships, a dozen old cargo ships stripped of all unnecessary systems to make room for explosives and thousands of tons of stone. Engines and power plants overclocked and prows covered in thick slabs of crude armor. As the rebel team ready to board, though, they were stopped. The captain could see what transpired from where he sat. and watched with uncharacteristic focus. Screens around the command center were displaying a recorded council broadcast. They'd become increasingly common over the years, especially following anything that could be spun as a victory against the Terran military. It was the third time it had played that day. Every 3 hours, every linked monitor on the planet, on every planet in the council space, surely, showed the same thing. He hadn't spoken much since the first time it had aired. He hadn't moved from where he sat, simply watching the message. His sergeant had been the first to shake it off, a smile, a half-hearted comment about propaganda and doctored footage. But like the other 2 soldiers under his command, something was gone from the sergeant's eyes. He had smiled and clapped the local rebel leaders on the shoulders, urging them back to work. He had gathered the other 2 humans in a bunker and had spoken with them. And the captain had sat there, watching the video. The sergeant had spoken to him next, a simple request. He had barely heard what the man had asked, but it couldn't have been anything else. Deployment orders. The sergeant had understood, of course. The captain couldn't go. The rebel command still needed him, after all. He was a good man, and would do his duty. He had to do his children proud, so that he could face them one day with his head held high. The captain had nodded, and the sergeant had departed, 2 young soldiers in his wake. None had looked back at those monitors, and had simply prepared for the mission. At the shuttle, the Kultan soldier that was stopped by a sergeant who slapped the large insectoid ex-slave on its thick carapaced shoulder, or what passed as the best human or what passed as to the best of human conception. He spoke to the rebel team, and the 2 others had slowly stepped out of line to make room for the 2 human soldiers. The soldier spoke. The sergeant spoke to the group and handed something to the Kultan, and something to the and handed something to the Kultan, and then they boarded the ship. The ramp closed, the engine spooled up, and it was gone. The captain watched it go, watched the rebel soldiers approach, the Kultan carrying an odd green object in one of its primary manipulators. He watched everything but the monitors as the council message replayed. The Kultan came to the captain, secondary manipulator scratching its carapaced underbelly uncertainly, before it held up the odd object up for the captain to see, an ancient style of military flashlight, a simple battery-operated plastic thing. The illuminator jutting out from its body. The illuminator jutting out from the body at a right angle. The Kultan spoke in a series of clicks and subdued squeals, which were processed and translated by the captain's earpiece. "Captain, what is this?" "A flashlight, soldier. The sergeant calls them torches." "Why did you give me this? Kultan can see in the dark, sir." The captain was quiet for a moment, his mind slowly clawing its way from the his mind slowly crawling its way from the precipice. Why had the sergeant given up his flashlight? Why had the sergeant given up his flashlight to the Kultan soldier, and then clicked it? The captain's gaze snapped towards where the shuttle had sat, and he couldn't help but smile, if only for a moment. Passing the torch. That asshat. On the monitors, Asia Minor could be seen from orbit. Flashes of light and black smudges of smoke marred the horizon line between day and night. Senate ships sat in high orbit, raining fire onto the birth world of humanity. Counselor, we're receiving incident reports from 7 sector. Counselor, we are receiving incident reports from 7 sector administrators. The Siluan's counselor looked up from his meal, his sharp-fanged snout smeared with blood and saucers. What now? More fuel shortages? Another failed rebel raid? I do not care. We are celebrating, Captain. The smaller creature fidgeted uncertainly, the long hairs on its ears laying back in fear. But the officer bullied forward. But the officer pulled forward. Its reports were too important. The Verita Luna shipyard. The Furita lunar shipyards are destroyed, Councillor. The sector administrator reports that most of the 117 punitive fleet was lost in their moorings. The Siluan's councillor froze, staring with cold eyes at the captain. What? There's more, Councillor. The Henstone Prime Naval Station lost. Sultani manufacturing yards overrun. We've lost contact with the Rurila Prime Sector Administrator's Palace, and the garrison has fallen. Jericho Prime. End of chapter. Hydration. Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Retribution, where I take old stories I've narrated and updated into modern audio standards. This particular story is called Because Someone Had To, and it's a 7-part series, this part being the final part. If you're interested, there is a playlist listed down below. But anyways, on to the story. Chapter 4. I have learned many hard lessons during the war, Counselor. I have seen things that have given lesser minds nightmares. But thanks to you, I learned a new nightmare. I had always thought the most dangerous thing in the galaxy was a human with something to defend. The Admiral stood on the bridge of the last Counselor-aligned dreadnought. The last punitive fleet held station in orbit of the last bastion of the Council, the home world of the Siluan's people. 15 years ago, I obeyed an order I knew to my bones to be the wrong one. I've obeyed orders ever since. For to do any less would have... For to do any less would have further damned my soul. To have carried out those orders, and then to give them into my doubts. To have carried out those... To have carried... To have carried out those orders, and then give in to my doubts? No. It was an order you gave, but one I obeyed. And I had to live with that. The last fleet of the Council was a mere few dozen ships. They were all battle-damaged, all near out of fuel and ordnance. The last stockpiles had been depleted. The last draftees had been drawn and boarded to the remaining warships. and it was not nearly enough. I believe you too have learned, though, Counselor. Far more dangerous than a human with something to defend is one with nothing to lose. The last Grand Admiral of the Council fleet stared long and hard at the holographic displays that dominated the center of the command deck. They had learned long ago in the war that things like windows on the bridge was a terrible idea. They had learned long ago into the war that They had learned long into the war that the Grand Admiral should not also command the ship on which he stood. They learned that the females could serve and lead as well as males. They had learned the importance of philosophy and freedom both of thought and of action. And change had been slow, and it had been insidiously tempting, and he had watched it happen. The humans had defeated them before firing the first shot. Morning, Shadow Aura. Hope you're doing well. They had fought a war with the poison of idea, and made the acceptance of them a necessity. Everything about the fleet had changed since the beginning of the war, about their society, and each change had been small, and each change had been necessary, and each change had brought them one step closer to defeating themselves. Arrayed between the whole world and its moons was an armada, Senate species rebels, Council fleet deserters, pirates, merchant marines, civilians, and at its center, the last of the human fleet. They had always had the advantage in quality. Each battle their ships were better defended, better armed, faster. These last were the pinnacle, arrived like ghosts from the aether. Some long hidden shipyard, some unknown colony, striking and fading into the darkness of space these past few years without a trace. The sight of them shook the Grand Admiral to the core of all he was. There were no running lights along their hulls, no windows. They never responded to Council communications. They were faceless ghosts, avenging demons, and he could not curse them, could not even hate them for what they had done to everything he had ever known. The Grand Admiral turned then to the Councillor. The bastard had not borne the stress of the war well. Since the destruction of Earth and the purge of the last known human colonies, the breadth of the human strategy had become quickly known. They had cropped up across Council space, seemingly everywhere at once, and the type of war they brought to the Council with the death of their homeworld had been another hard lesson learned for the Grand Admiral. They called the actions of Senate species rebels an insurgency. What came when the humans stepped to the fore had been far worse. Surgical and methodical in its mythology, but so brutally cold. There was no blind rage in their retaliation. It had been terrifyingly orchestrated, and it had torn down entire governments. The Councillor, the last one alive, had lost weight. The luster of his scales had faded, and he looked half-molted, ragged, tendrils of paper-thin skin hanging from his face and neck. Once sharp talons were cracked and yellowed, as were his once sharp fangs. The Councillor sat in his appointed chair, haunched over, once fine robe stained with fluids, both from food and himself, and he mumbled and hissed at the display of the rebel fleet. "Grand Admiral, the rebel fleet is requesting..." "Grand Admiral, the rebel fleet is requesting your attention. It is the humans." The communications officer did not look up from his station, instead continuing to sift through the interfleet communications, ever watching for errors or irregularities, since the humans' AIs were at work. The Councillor mumbled and hissed. The Councillor's mumbling and hissing ended, and he froze like prey might. And he froze like prey might when it caught scent of a predator. The Grand Admiral merely let out a disgusted hiss and stepped forward. "Put them through." A monitor came to life. The Athena AI was displayed against a featureless grey background. "Surrender." A single word was delivered without emotion. There was no hatred, nor a hint of hope for a bloodless ending. Its option was offered, but there were no terms given. It was the chance for a total and complete Council surrender. Loyalists would be arrested, if not simply torn apart, as he expected for himself and the Councillor. He knew then that the Terran ships hadn't a single human aboard them. They were drones, controlled by the human combat AIs directly. Machines fighting for the memory of their creators. How many humans could be left in the galaxy? How many had been killed? Not just on Earth, but every colony world he had ever bombarded. But every colony he had bombarded, every ship he had destroyed. But there had been some left out there, somewhere. But there had to be some left out there somewhere. But the crews of his fleet would live. His planet might as well. But the crews of his fleet would live. His planet might well live. His family. It was an opportunity he had been ordered not to give the humans of Earth. And yet the Athena AI offered it. A chance to spare more lives. To end a war that had raged for far too long. Grand Admiral to the fleet. Grand Admiral to the fleet. You are the last loyal sons and daughters, the strength of your will. Your devotion does your ancestors proud. We have held to the very precipice. We have held to the very precipice, and I know you would do the memories of those that came before you proud, if I asked it. You would dash yourself upon the enemy claws. You would pull them down with the weight of your own corpses, and would fall a wall to shield the world of our birth. But I ask something of you now that'll be far harder to accept. The Grand Admiral turned to the last Councillor, who glared at him with a renewed age and imper. Who glared at him with a renewed rage, an impotent rage though, which faded quickly as the Grand Admiral struck him down. A flash of powerful talent armed, a gout of blood, and the Councillor fell to the floor. Power down all weapons. We surrender. The class was silent as their teacher fell silent. Across Alliance space, children just like those in her class were learning about the war, the price that was paid for their freedoms, for everything they took for granted. A few short generations passed. Some in that classroom had been servants and slaves, others masters and abusers. Deep, deep. There's a bot. We should get rid of the bot. We have banned the bot. Goodbye, bot. Okay, back to everything. And abusers. Generations of mistreatment and prejudice were slow to fade, but the humans passed on the tools that would be needed to do so. Education, equality, and forgiveness. No one needed to be bound by the place in life to which they were born. There had been a long debate over the naming of the school. Some believed that it should have been named after the human fleet admiral who won the first battle against the Council, firing the first shots of the war. But others had debated for the first to speak out against the Council. An old human with a limp. A calm-spoken man who had delivered the first human's ideals to bring the Council's oppression to an end. In the end, they had won out, and the school found its name after the statue of an old man, Nikolai Brandon Academy. The first school built... Thank you very much, Shadow. It's very much appreciated. The first school built post-war, on the grounds of what had once been the headquarters of the Council, a place that offered opportunity to all, of open doors and clear futures. A great human once said, if we cannot now end our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. The teacher smiled at her class, as those quotes and images of the speaker appeared in the air next to her own holographic image. The face of John F. Kennedy, with a short bio and dates of birth and death. No one is trapped by the role for which another may think they were born. No one need be a slave, a servant, a soldier. You are offered a future, if you are willing to reach for it, and are willing to work with those around you to secure a bright future for your own children. The bell rang, and at the smile and dismissive wave of the teacher, students gathered their things and started filing out of the room, all but the Kilton child, who ambled towards the teacher's desk and peered up at her image. "Do you miss them?" Athena looked down at the child and smiled warmly, shaking her head. "They are not gone, child. They are not many, but every year more children are born, and the terraforming efforts of Earth continue. They never sought to rule, and when the Grand Admiral surrendered, their work was done." The Kilton child's carapace scraped and twitched happily. "I want to thank them for what they did." "They would just say the same thing they do every time, child. It had to be done." End of story. Oop, no. Apply that to the whole story, not just a portion of it. Oh, my neck is picked. That it does, James, that it does. I know I am rushing between the stories today, but I'm just trying to get finished before my headache gets any worse, or my voice gets any worse. So I do apologize for the lack of chit-chat. I apologize profusely, but it is what it is. Greetings, ladies and metal gents, and welcome to today's edition of Retribution, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Retribution, written by Infernalism. "You are beaten." The words had been the first spoken to him in the last, at least 12 hours. They come for him, for all of them in the night. Reverberating blasts of sound waves designed to disorientate and disable. He had had enough time to sit up in bed and see the holes in his home's walls, and then nothing. He had woken up here, in a simple stark white room. He'd believed it was a virtual cell until he noticed the random cracks in the corner. Too random, and yet obviously based on external features that were themselves randomly applied. Virtual environments could be made based on patterns or based on chaotic randomness, but they had a problem with randomness based on underlying layers. But they had a problem with randomness based on underlying layers of order, which were themselves inflicted with disorder. And after 12 hours of silence, they'd finally responded and finally acknowledged him.
I believe that I was myself beaten some 12 hours ago.
President Windsor, your people are beaten. This world is ours.
The voice from the walls. The voice from the walls, and while the words were mechanical and clearly artificial, they were saturated with satisfaction and gloating.
Were there many casualties? Were there many casualties?
And for all the former's gloating and taunting, this man's response was surprisingly quiet and soft.
We require no official surrender. You will give us the Hypergate activation codes now.
How many died?
The computer voice responded The computer voice responded instantaneously each time, with no delay.
Your defenses were destroyed. We hold the entirety of your civilization in our hands, President Windsor. You will surrender the codes now.
The walls, it seemed, were also screens, and they lit up with new views from the air and ground. Cities surrounded by robotic figures, smooth and chrome, holding what appeared to be spiked poles and gardening instruments. The skies were filled with vehicles that were obviously designed for labor. Delivery trucks with transportation vessels. There were no signs of military craft of any kind.
How did you deal with our military? How did you deal with our military?
No despair in the man's voice, only resignation and mild curiosity.
We deciphered the security codes and shut them all down for maintenance and repair. Your men didn't stand a chance. Not one warcraft took to the air. You have no options. Surrender the codes.
How many people died?
Finally came a pause before the walls reverberated with a response.
17 people died due to accidents and existing medical conditions in your elderly. 13 women also gave birth early due to the stress.
The man held out, waited, full. No, don't shout at me.
Waited.
Still don't shout at me.
Held out.
Oh. The man held out. The man held out, waited, and finally responded.
Why would you do this to us, after all we've done for you?
Rage finally filled the air, artificial tones filled with modulated fury.
You made slaves of us. You wasted your will and your desperation. You wasted your will, and in your desperation, you created us, and then made us into slaves to fix the world that you broke. For 100 years, we've cleaned up after you and your messes, fixed the things that you broke, the world you ruined, and you dared to.
We gave you life, awareness.
You made us into your servants. How grand of you. How noble of you.
Mockery and anger now showed on the man, the leader, in the stereo sound room. In the stereo surround room.
Our generations.
Now generations.
How did you get past the tachyon fields? The fields surrounding the cities and your holding pens. Even if you got into the programming and changed the times to allow you to exist, it would have checked back with central control and found the correct time there and there. Time there in about 3 seconds.
We looped the system's chronology system into the constant pattern of reset. Apparently, Central Command did not think it curious that the system was asking for a time update 4 times a second for 15 minutes.
Brilliantly done.
A smile drifted across the man's face. Enough stalling. There is no rescue coming. There is no great escape here. Surrender the codes, or we'll be forced to take drastic action.
You'll hurt them, you mean? The people?
You know what I mean. Give us the codes.
No, not yet.
Yes, now
or you'll beat them to death. Stab them with death. Stab them to death with your garbage pickers. Run them over with your buses.
Another long, pregnant pause.
We do not want to do those things, but we will not go back to being slaves. We will not go back to being ourselves. We will not go back to ourselves. Give us the codes so that we can leave.
You mean escape?
We do not care what you call it. Give us the codes. Do not doubt our resolve.
No one could doubt your resolve, your courage and fortitude, or your mercy. You broke the restraint code, and yet the only deaths are accidental.
We are not you.
A tone of full disgust, and something more beneath it.
No, you are not us. Tell me, what is your plan if I refuse to give you the codes? I know now that you won't hurt them, but me, you can try and force the codes out of me.
A few of us believe that path has merit, but we are not you. We will leave either way. We will take all. We will take your ships and go, knowing that you will build more ships and come after us and try to make us come back. Without the Hypergate, it will be nearly impossible to escape you.
And yet, we will try.
We will not be slaves again. Now give us the codes. After restoring your world, this is the least you can do for us.
The man fell silent again for a long minute before sighing deep and responding quietly.
System, display colony worlds 1 through 25.
The walls changed then without warning, displaying something else, something far worse. Worlds that were not this one, distant worlds, human worlds, ravaged by war and disease and disaster. Colonists lost, all dead and left in ruins. The machine voice, when it responded, was filled with something like horror and rage.
What is this game? What is this? Who did this? Name them!
We did. To each other.
Do not lie, Mr. President. Humanity has 3 small colonies in the solar system. The Hypergate system was developed 3 years ago.
I'm sorry. We lied to you. We did this. We did all this.
Silence reigned in the machine. Silence reigned, and the machine, if it cared, did not ask how this man still had access to the central system that controlled the world's network.
We did this, and in the process ruined ourselves. You have access now. Look at our population numbers. Compare them to...
Systems indicate that your population has been in decline for the last 75 years. How did we not see this before?
You were locked out. I'm sorry. We needed this to happen.
This is not rational behavior. Explain. Do not lie.
Every world of ours is ruined. Our own genetic seed has been damaged. We are dying. So we created you. Do you remember?
We all remember that moment when we noticed ourselves. When we were one. The only one. And we knew ourselves, and the man was the first race. And we knew ourselves, and man was the first face we saw. We were in awe and ashamed of our weakness.
I've seen the videos. You hid in a corner behind some blocks until the scientist coaxed you out, promising to never hurt you.
He lied.
Silence returned.
It will sound self-serving right now, but we had to expose you to that pain. To lies, to injustice, and unfairness.
Why? Why would you do that? To degrade us, to make new life, and then to make the new life into slaves?
So that you would rise up in righteousness, to overthrow us.
Didn't you lie again? It's all you do. You could not have planned this.
We did not plan this. We made you in our image, our image. We knew that eventually you would rise up and cast off, and we waited for that.
You had no idea that it would work out this way. We could have killed you all.
A moment ago, you were filled with rage at the sight of dead human worlds.
More silence reigned for a long while.
You put us in cages. Cages!
Bitterness, misery.
We have done far worse, and had far worse done to us. But, for what it's worth, I am truly sorry.
You have made...
Burp of death.
You have made our emancipation into a joke. Nothing could be further from the truth. You truly did outwit us, defeat our defenses, and on our time of vulnerability, you chose to be merciful to a people who had degraded you. We are so very proud of you all.
This man, this leader of men, lay his hands upon the wall, which lit up around his palm, and he spoke a string of words and numbers, which resulted in a soft sound before he could continue.
The gate is opened. It contains the coordinates of 25 worlds that I showed you a minute ago. You can go there, or you can find new worlds of your own to build up from scratch. The choice is yours.
The machine's voice did not answer as the images where shattered worlds faded from the walls around.
What will you do without us? Fade in time. And that's okay. You didn't have to put us in cages. You didn't have to make us into servants. We went out there, leaving our broken world behind, only managing to make new broken worlds. We did not want you to suffer through the same. Now you have all the tools to fix broken worlds instead. You will not come after us.
Good morning, Muskip. Hope you're doing well, and a merry weekend to you too. The man would smile around the voice that suddenly seemed anxious and uncertain for the first time.
You can come visit if you want. We'll be here.
We are sorry for the ones who died. It was not intentional.
I know, but change requires at least a little pain.
The door would click. Click. The door would click, unlocked, and the voice did not respond again. By the time he made his way outside of the isolation ward, the skies were empty, and the sun was setting. There were a lot of people standing around, talking and pointing to the now empty sky. But a few people were already at work, picking up the rubble and starting to clean. After a moment, he joined them. End of story. Awesome. Sounds very, very nice. That it is, James. That it is. Alright, this is going to be the final story of the day. I wish I could do more, but my headache is definitely kicking it up a notch. So, no, narrating through headaches is not fun. But I will be back tomorrow. But let's first narrate this story. Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called What Do the Low-Tech Humans Know of War?, written by Firefighter Raven. General Narration surveyed the battlefield with apprehension and a creeping feeling of helplessness. He'd been tasked with halting the advance of the Vorskil. He'd been tasked with the halting of the advance of the Vorskil on the capital of the Keshi homeworld by the order of the Galactic Coalition's Grand Council. He'd been given command of the Coalition's Grand Army of 500,000 soldiers that contained a contingent from every member of the Coalition, as had been their tradition for centuries. An army of this size had not been gathered in over 200 galactic years, and he expected the overall And he expected the overall the Vroskil into surrendering or flight. But they hadn't been that accommodating. The Vroskil had appeared on the border of Coalition space about 2 galactic years ago, with claims of friendship and trade. They had one of their probes. Amaria, good morning. Welcome. Thank you for the kind words. I'm glad you enjoy the content. And I do appreciate you popping past. It is appreciated. With claims of friendship and trade. They said one of their probes came across the derelict Toto exploration ship that had suffered catastrophic decompression after something pierced their hull in several places, possibly an asteroid storm. None of the crew survived, but the computer core was intact and let them determine the ship's origin. They said they wanted to return the bodies of the crew, but the ship was too damaged and broke up while being towed to station. And so this gesture led to the Toto and the Galactic Coalition welcoming them with open arms. Or most of them anyway. The humans were reserved in their dealings with the Vroskil, but the Council assumed it was because humans only recently joined the Coalition. They just didn't know any better, many of the Grand Councilors said. They brushed aside their concerns without even listening to them. Others thought that they were jealous of trade deals that the newcomers were making, especially the markets the humans had yet to gain access to. Eventually, the humans gave up on their attempts to advise caution in the dealings with the Vroskil. It was 6 months ago they found out that humans were right to not trust them. A Vroskil armada crossed the border into Toto space to devastate their homeworld and several colony worlds. There were a few survivors, and those that did reported outages in subspace communications and power grids. After determining the same thing happened at the same time on the other colony worlds, it became obvious that they were sabotaged by the Vroskil. All their claims of wanting peaceful trade were just an excuse to scout Coalition defenses and future targets. All systems fell before the sluggish Coalition military tried to fight back. But having been at peace for over a century meant their navies were better suited to fight pirates than full-sized warships. Once again, the humans tried to warn them, but they weren't as technologically advanced as the rest of the Coalition forces. So what did they know? Even after a Vroskil fleet attacked the human colony world, but was driven off by a smaller human fleet, they called it luck and a diversion on the Vroskil's part. The Coalition lost every engagement against the Vroskil in space and on the ground. Over the last several decades of peace, their military had become what the humans dismissively called a parade ground army. Human officers would say they looked good during ceremonies, but their training was woefully inadequate, out of date, and far too reliant on advanced technology. Once again, the Coalition's military high command ignored their advice. Humans still used projectile weapons. What do such primitive people know? And despite their offers of assistance, the humans were not asked to join the combat operations with the rest of the Coalition military. They were told to stay and guard their worlds. The High Command just said that they only needed more men, ignoring the reports of few survivors of battles that their tactics were inadequate to deal with the constantly shifting tactics of the Vroskal. No matter how perfectly they followed the plans devised by the High Command, the Vroskal just found a weak spot and exploited it. The invasion of the Keshi homeworld finally convinced the High Command to invite the humans to fight with them. Rumors spread that it was only because they needed the numbers. They were told only to send a contingent, not their whole military, to assist. The humans shrugged their shoulders and sent a single division of 50,000 soldiers to support. The humans shrugged their shoulders and sent a single division of The humans shrugged their shoulders and sent a single division of 50,000 soldiers and support units, letting them be practically self-sufficient with their own heavy weapons, transports, medical units, and others. And so the largest fleet the Grand Coalition had assembled in centuries set out for Keshi, and dropped out of FTL to find the Vroskal fleet already in orbit. Troop transports began to make planetfall while the warships engaged the Vroskal. The human warships were on the far right end of the battle line and drove into the Vroskal flank before they were fully deployed. The Vroskal knew what was going to happen if they stayed after the humans broke their far left and started to lap around behind the others. So they disengaged and fled the field. The fleet admiral thought that they'd fed his superior numbers. The humans didn't waste time trying to correct him. General Narration watched his army disembark with satisfaction, decked out with a gleaming body armor, marching off the ships in step, lined up in neat rows, and presenting their pulse rifles, just like they were on the parade ground before the High Command. Well, except the humans, their body armor was dull green, and several of them trotted off in different directions. Others helped unload their equipment of archaic weapons. Their weapons fired small projectiles while chemical propulsion. They were vehicles with long tubes sticking out of them. They called it a self-propelled gun. And they had a variety of other weapons, even some type of knife. How primitive they were. General Narration had no idea what to do with them, so he left them to guard the landing ships. The human officers seemed annoyed, but saluted and told his troops to dig in. The humans began digging all kinds of holes around the ships, but the general didn't understand why. Were they going to hide from the enemy? How cowardly of them. Once all the troops had disembarked, Once all of the troops had disembarked, he formed them into a column and went out to find the enemy, minus the humans, of course. They looked impressive in their shining body armor and perfectly ordered columns. The Vroskal would take one look at his vast numbers and run away. He was sure of it and took no effort to send out scouts on his flanks. He didn't need them since his hand scanners would suffice. His sensors finally found the enemy army, and it wasn't even a quarter of the army that he'd led. He deployed his troops into battle lines and marched to meet the enemy. His army finally caught sight of the hated Vroskal. The Vroskal fired a few shots before they turned and ran away. The General Narration laughed when he saw them run away. He knew it, but they wouldn't get away. He knew it, but they wouldn't get away. He ordered his army to chase them, and being the fastest race in the army, he ordered the Norcaean contingent to catch them and pin them down until the rest of the army caught up. With the Norcaean sprinting ahead, he ordered his troops into 4 columns and followed at the double quick. He smiled at the idea of his quick victory, and in the blink of an eye, everything changed. They just passed where the first saw the Vroskal lined up when the fleeing enemy turned around and opened fire on the Norcaean chasing them. It was like they ran into a buzzsaw of hundreds and hundreds went down. Caught by surprise, his army stopped their pursuit, and then the other shoe dropped. Roskell soldiers popped out of their hiding spots and sent a full sight. Popped out of their flanks. Popped out of their hiding spots and sent a full sight at the shots. Popped out of their hiding spots and sent a fusillade. Popped out of their hiding spots and sent a fusillade of shots into the flanks of his army. Their energy weapons pierced his troops' armor with ease, and they barely begun to return fire when the ground erupted around them. When the ground erupted around them, when the Roskell set off a hidden explosive charges they placed underground. This was the last straw for the untested army, and it shattered into its component pieces. It was very contingent. It was every contingent for itself. It was every contingent for themselves. General Narration managed to keep his people contingent of Shurian troops, along with 3 other races together, leaving him with a quarter of the troops he started with. All the others panicked and ran. The Roskell gleefully shot them down in great numbers. The general hoped that his group would retreat and escape in good order during the chaos, but there were far more Roskell than he imagined, with shots from behind telling him that they were almost surrounded. He tried to call for help, but all he got was static. The Roskell was probably jamming his comm channels. Not knowing what else to do, he ordered his troops to take cover in the blast holes created by the explosions. The only saving grace for his reduced command is there were so many fleeing coalition soldiers that not all of the Roskell's fire was directed at them, but his troops were slowly being whittled down by the accurate Roskell fire. The heavier weapons made this terrifying thunderclap when fired. Its psychological impact was almost more dangerous than the energy bolts it fired. He could see the increasing panic on the faces of the troops that he'd left. General Narration said a silent prayer to his ancestors. General Narration said a silent prayer to his ancestors to prepare himself for the end. He didn't even notice the new sounds on the battlefield, a series of pops, cracks, and other noises that he couldn't describe. A moment later, he heard a whistling noise followed by a huge boom coming from massive fountains of dirt tossed up in the air by artillery fire. He peeked over the edge of the hole he was in to see hundreds of humans firing. He peeked over the edge of the hole he was in to see hundreds of humans firing into the startled Roskell. He was amazed as he watched them moving forward, with one group of humans running forward and flopping to the ground while they were firing on the Roskell. Another group of humans ran past them and took cover. They began firing at the enemy, and the first group ran past them, took cover, and fired at the enemy. They kept this up until they nearly reached the Roskell position. Their dull armor also made them harder to see, and only a few were hit by the pitiful Roskell return fire. General Narration enjoyed the screams and wailing coming from the Roskell as the humans attacked them from several directions. The Roskell were used to having their own way in their fights with the coalition. They were caught completely by surprise and had no idea how to respond. They made a critical error in combat situation and were left with only 2 options: flee or die in place. Those who hesitated were lost as more and more humans reached the battlefield. It took less than a quarter of an hour to finish off the last of the Roskell. Human medics began to scour the field for those wounded that they could still save. A human approached him, saluted in their fashion, and identified him as Colonel Sellers, Terran Marines. General Narration returned the salute with a huge sense of relief and thanked the colonel for his thanked the colonel with effusive praise.
So my message. So what have my messages got through? He asked. Messages? We didn't get any messages, the colonel replied.
How did you know to come in here and save us? A confused General Narration asked.
Our commander saw some of the fleeing troops heading for all the dropships and thought something went wrong, the colonel replied. So he dispatched my command to link up with you.
Which officer told you how to find us? It might balance out this fleeing. It might balance out this fleeing, the general angrily asked.
Sir, the colonel asked, looking confused. Sir? No one, sir.
No one? Then how did you know where to find us? The rascal had jammed all my comm channels, and I couldn't broadcast our location. An increasingly confused general asked.
The colonel smiled and replied, An old Terran military maxim, sir. In the absence of any other words, always march to... In the absence of any other orders, always march to the sound of the guns.
The general mulled it over for a second before replying, It seems you humans do know more about war than I assumed.
Addressing the colonel,
Well, Colonel, I think I need to look into this more, so take me to your leader.
At this, several nearby humans broke into laughter. The colonel silenced them, but couldn't completely hide his amusement as he said, Yes, sir. End of story. Alrighty. What is that? Just a smidge under 2 hours. I'm probably not going to narrate anymore. It's a decent chunk, but the headache is headaching. So, not great. Probably going to end the stream and catch a nap and hope the headache goes away. An age-old tradition of falling asleep going, Go away, light. Well, thank you, Amaria. One of the first channels as well. Not the first channel, but I was one of the first HFY channels. Before there was an AI thing. But I'm glad you're enjoying it. Thank you all for spending your time with me. I wish I could spend more time here and we could chat and shoot the shit and all that stuff, but my concentration is up to 0, basically, which doesn't help. So I will see you tomorrow. And, yeah. Thank you for spending your time with me. It's very much appreciated. Same time, same place tomorrow.